Nature has laws written in blood, and the oldest one is simple: the lion hunts and the buffalo kills. But on a night when the sky turned to ash and the earth began to burn, that law was shattered. You are about to hear a true battle for survival, where a defenseless cub is abandoned in the heart of an inferno, and her only hope for rescue comes from a monster sworn to destroy her kind. This isn't just a story about the wild. It is an impossible collision of enemies that defies biology itself. By the time this ends, you won't just believe in miracles. You'll understand why even the most savage beasts are capable of redemption. Before we step into the fire, please take a split second to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps us share these powerful stories with more people. Now, let's witness the impossible. The Inferno and the Outcast, the dry season in the Serengeti, does not ask for permission. It takes. It strips the moisture from the air until the atmosphere feels brittle, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. The grass, once a vibrant swaying ocean of green, had turned into a vast golden tinderbox. The earth was baked into a hard, cracked mosaic that radiated heat long after the sun had dipped below the horizon. For the Naramat pride, this was the season of endurance. But for Amara, life was still too new to be measured in seasons. At 12 weeks old, her existence was a small, protected bubble, defined by the rough, sandpaper warmth of her mother's tongue, the milky scent of her belly, and the playful, sharp-toothed nips of her littermates. She was a ball of tawny fluff with paws too big for her body and amber eyes that looked at the world with a mixture of confusion and entitlement. The night the red beast came, the air tasted of copper. Amara had been sleeping, tucked tight against the flank of Zuri, her mother. The rhythm of the pride was a comforting, heavy breathing in the dark. Malik, her father and the king of the pride, lay a few yards away, his massive, black-maned head resting on his paws, a silent sentinel even in sleep. It didn't begin with a roar. It began with a snap, a violent electric crack that split the purple, bruised sky. Amara jolted awake, her heart hammering against her ribs. The smell hit her instantly. Not the dusty scent of the plains, but something acrid, sharp, and choking. Ozone and burning acacia. "Mama?" she mewed, the sound barely a squeak against the growing wind. Zuri was already moving. The lioness stood up, her muscles coiled tight. A low, urgent growl rumbled in her throat, a command to the cubs. Stay close. Be silent. But silence was impossible. The horizon, usually a seamless blend of black earth and starry sky, was glowing. A jagged line of orange light danced maniacally in the distance, growing taller with every heartbeat. The wind, fed by the heat of the fire, roared like a living thing, whipping the flames into a frenzy. The panic of the savannah was a physical vibration in the ground before it became a sound. The first wave of refugees arrived moments later. Wildebeest, usually slow and rhythmic, thundered past in a chaotic river of terror, their eyes rolling white in the darkness. Zebras shrieked, a high, tearing sound that blurred into a dizzying strobe effect against the flickering light. "Move!" Malik's roar cut through the chaos, a thunderclap that mobilized the pride. Amara tried to follow Zuri's golden tail, but the world had dissolved into madness. A chaotic kick from a passing kudu, blind with fear, caught the cub in the shoulder. It wasn't a malicious strike, but the force of the heavy hoof sent Amara tumbling backward. She rolled, over and over, into a dry ravine, landing in a tangle of dead roots and dust. The impact knocked the breath from her lungs. When she scrambled to her paws, shaking the dirt from her coat, she looked up at the ridge. The silhouette of the pride was gone. The golden kings and queens had vanished into the orange glow. "Mama!" Amara cried out, louder this time, fighting the smoke that stung her throat. She scrambled up the side of the ravine, her small claws finding little purchase in the crumbling soil. When she finally crested the ridge, she was met not with the comforting bulk of her father, but with a wall of heat so intense it singed her whiskers. The fire was a tidal wave, consuming the night, eating the oxygen. She ran. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to move away from the heat. Her instincts, ancient and hardwired, screamed at her to find cover. But there was no cover. The tall grass was fuel. The bushes were torches. For hours, she was a small, insignificant speck in a migration of fear. She dodged hooves that could crush her skull like an eggshell. She flattened herself against the earth as shadows leaped over her. By the time the sun rose, it was a blood-red disk struggling to pierce the heavy gray wool of the smoke. The fire was miles behind her now, a distinct line of destruction, but so was everything she had ever known. 2 days passed. To a human, 2 days is an inconvenience. To a nursing cub, separated from her pride, it is a lifetime. Amara was fading. The landscape she wandered was alien, the ashlands, where the fire had passed days earlier, leaving behind a skeletal forest of blackened trees and ground that was still warm to the touch. The silence here was heavier than the noise of the fire. It pressed against her ears. There were no birds, no insects, no wind in the grass, because there was no grass. Just ash, gray, powdery ash that coated her fur, turning her into a little ghost. Amara's belly, round and full just 48 hours ago, was now hollow and cramping. Hunger was a dull ache, but thirst was a sharp, jagged pain. Her tongue felt like sandpaper against the roof of her mouth. Her pads were blistered from the hot earth. She walked because stopping meant the fear would catch up to her. "Mama will come," she told herself. "Papa will roar, and I will hear him." But the only sound was the crunch of charcoal under her paws. By the afternoon of the second day, hallucinations began to flicker at the edge of her vision. She thought she saw Zuri's tail twitching behind a blackened stump, but it was just a trick of the heat waves. She thought she heard a low chuff of greeting, but it was just a shifting branch. Then the wind shifted. It carried a scent that cut through the acrid smell of char, damp mud. Amara stopped. Her nose twitched. Water! She crested a small rise and saw it. It wasn't a paradise. It was a depression in a dried riverbed, a stagnant pool of brown, sludge-thick water shrinking under the relentless sun. It was framed by the skeletal remains of a dead acacia tree. But to Amara, it was an ocean. She stumbled down the bank, her legs trembling with weakness. She didn't check for crocodiles. She didn't check the wind for predators. She simply collapsed at the edge, plunging her muzzle into the muck, lapping frantically. The grit coated her teeth, but the moisture was life. She drank until she choked, coughing up mud, then drank again. She was so consumed by the need to survive that she didn't hear the soft click of paws on stone. She didn't smell the musk, pungent, rot-sweet, and terrifying, until the shadow fell over her. Amara froze. The water dripping from her chin turned cold. Slowly she lifted her head. Standing 10 feet away was a nightmare manifested in flesh. The creature was low-slung and powerful, with shoulders that hunched high and a back that sloped downward, giving it the appearance of a creature perpetually ready to lunge. Its fur was a patchy mess of brown spots on dirty yellow, and its jaws were massive, designed by nature not just to cut meat, but to crush bone. This was Kisi. The matriarch of the southern hyena clan was a creature of calculated cruelty. She was missing half of her left ear, a jagged testament to a war fought long ago, and her eyes shone with a chilling, intelligent malice. She wasn't alone. Behind her, emerging from the dead brush like gray wraiths, were 6 others. Among them was Dogo, a nervous male who twitched constantly, his eyes locked on the cub with a mix of hunger and cowardice. Amara scrambled backward, her wet paws slipping on the rocks. She pressed herself against the charred trunk of the dead acacia tree. She hissed, arching her back, fluffing her fur to try and look bigger. She tried to look like the daughter of a king. But she was 12 weeks old, and she weighed 15 pounds. Kessie let out a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, but a high-pitched, stuttering wheeze. It was a sound of delight. She didn't attack immediately. Hyenas like Kisi enjoyed the terror of the prey. It seasoned the meat. She began to circle, her head low, her gait loose and eerie. "Lost little princess," the posture seemed to say. "Where is your daddy now?" Kisi lunged forward a few inches, snapping her jaws. Amara flinched, batting the air with a paw that looked pitifully small. The hyenas yipped, a chorus of mocking excitement. Dogo moved in from the left, nipping at Amara's flank. She spun around, snarling, but another nipped at her tail. They were closing the net, tightening the circle, wearing her down. Amara's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She opened her mouth to roar, to summon the power of her bloodline, but all that came out was a high, desperate cry. It was the sound of a child who realizes, for the first time, that the monsters are real. "Help me!" The cry echoed across the dead riverbed, bouncing off the stones, lonely and terrified. Cassie stopped circling. She licked her chops, stepping forward to end the game. The cub was cornered. There was nowhere to run. The matriarch opened her jaws, saliva dripping onto the ash. Then the ground shook. It was a subtle vibration at first, rattling the pebbles near the water. Then it became a rhythmic thudding. Thump, thump, thump. Casey's head snapped up. The clan fell silent. From the haze of the heat waves, a mountain emerged. He was colossal, a Cape Buffalo bull, old and solitary, carrying the weight of a tank and the temper of a thunderstorm. His coat was sparse, revealing a hide akin to weathered slate, scarred by thorns and claws of battles past. But it was his horns that commanded silence. The boss, the fused shield of bone across his forehead, was thick and battered, sweeping out into curved daggers that spanned 4 feet. This was Jabari. He did not trot, he marched. He stopped 20 yards away, letting out a snort that kicked up a plume of dust. His dark, wet eyes took in the scene instantly. The cowering cub. The circling pack. The natural order of the African savanna is written in blood, and the rule is simple. Lions and buffalo are eternal enemies. It is a feud older than the trees. Lions hunt calves. Buffalo kill cubs to eliminate future threats. It is a war of attrition. Kizzy relaxed slightly. She knew the rules. The bull would either ignore them. Hyenas were rarely worth the effort for a bull this size. Or, better yet, he would charge the cub and trample it into the mud, removing a future apex predator from the ecosystem. It would save the clan the effort. Jabari looked at Amara. The cub was shaking so violently her teeth chattered. Her eyes were wide, fixed on him, not with hope, but with the terrifying realization that a monster bigger than the hyenas had arrived. Jabari felt a familiar burn in his chest. It wasn't anger at the cub. It was something older, a dull ache that never really left him. He looked at the hyenas. Scavengers, tormentors, creatures that lacked the honor of a clean kill. He looked at Casey, saw the arrogance in her stance. And then, he looked back at Amara. In the tilt of her head, in the desperate, wide-eyed plea, he saw a ghost. The memory hit him with the force of a physical blow, the smell of the river, the panic. A small, dark calf sinking beneath the water, eyes locked on him, trusting him. And he, Jabari, the strong protector, freezing on the bank. Not today. Jabari lowered his head. He didn't charge the cub. He charged the space between the cub and the death awaiting her. The acceleration was terrifying for a creature of his size. Kissy's eyes went wide. She barked a warning, scrambling back, but Dogo was too slow. Jabari hit the hyena with the side of his boss, a collision that sounded like a cracking tree branch. Dogo was launched into the air, tumbling end over end to land in a heap of yelps and dust 10 feet away. Jabari skidded to a halt in front of the dead tree, placing his massive, ton-heavy body directly between Amara and the clan. He stamped a hoof, the sound like a gunshot. He swung his horns low, creating a barrier of bone. "Come and get her," his posture screamed. "But you go through me," Kessie hissed, pacing furiously. This was wrong. This was against the laws of the wild. "Why?" her snarling face seemed to ask. She feinted a charge, testing him. Jabari didn't flinch. He bellowed, a deep, guttural roar that vibrated in the chests of everyone present. It was a sound of pure, unchecked aggression. Amara, squeezed against the tree bark, stared at the wall of muscle in front of her. She smelled the buffalo's scent: dry grass, heavy musk, and dust. It wasn't the scent of her pride, but it was the scent of safety. The standoff lasted until the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and red. Kissy was ruthless, but she was not stupid. A healthy buffalo bull could kill half her clan before going down. She let out a chittering call, signaling a retreat. "We wait," her glare promised. "He has to sleep." The hyenas melted back into the shadows, their eyes reflecting the twilight like floating embers. Night settled over the ashlands. The air cooled rapidly. Jabari did not lie down. He stood like a statue carved from rock, his ears swiveling at every snap of a twig. Amara was exhausted. The adrenaline had drained away, leaving her cold and trembling. She looked at the buffalo's hind legs, thick as tree trunks. She hesitated. He was the enemy. Her mother had taught her that the horned ones were death. But the horned one had saved her. Cautiously, inch by inch, she crawled forward. She waited for him to kick her. He shifted his weight, and she froze. But he didn't kick. He just let out a long, weary sigh, a stream of warm air from his nostrils, disturbing the dust. Amara crept closer until her small, shivering body pressed against the rough hair of Jabari's fetlock. The heat radiating from him was immense. She closed her eyes, stealing a fraction of his warmth. Jabari looked down. He could feel the tiny weight against his hoof. It was absurd. It was treason. It was a lion. But as he looked at the sleeping ball of fur, the image of the drowning calf faded, replaced by the rhythmic breathing of the life he had managed for one day to protect. The bull grunted softly, staring out into the dark, daring the shadows to move. The sun rose on the ashlands with a relentless, blinding glare, stripping away the cool mercy of the night. The landscape revealed itself in harsh detail, a world of monochrome grays and blacks, where the only color was the sky. Jabari was already moving before the first true heat of the day set in. He nudged Amara awake not with a gentle lick, but with a rough shove of his wet snout. Amara yelped, scrambling up, her paws slipping in the dust. She hissed at him instinctively, a tiny sound of defiance. Jabari ignored it. He turned his massive head toward the south, toward the distant green haze of the Rift Valley, and began to walk. He didn't wait for her. He set a pace that was punishing for short legs. Amara realized quickly that she had a choice. Stay here and die, or follow the mountain. She followed. The journey was a crucible. The fire had left the earth scorched and barren. There was no shade, and the ground was a patchwork of sharp stones and hot ash that worked its way between Amara's toes. Her paws were raw, the pads cracking. Every step was a negotiation with pain. She trotted to keep up, her pink tongue lolling out, panting rapidly to cool her blood. Jabari knew they were being hunted. He couldn't see Kisi, but he could feel her. Hyenas were endurance hunters. They didn't need to be faster or stronger. They just needed to be there when you finally collapsed. He kept moving to deny them that satisfaction. But as he walked, the rhythmic crunch of his hooves against the dry earth sent his mind drifting back, peeling away the layers of his grumpiness to the wound beneath. The memory was always there, lurking behind his eyes. 4 years ago. The Mara River. The herd was crossing, a chaotic churn of brown bodies and white water. Jabari was younger then, a lieutenant in the herd hierarchy, strong and arrogant. His coat was sleek, his horns unblemished. His calf, a male with a distinctive white star on his forehead, was struggling against the current. Jabari had been on the bank, safe. He had climbed out, shaking the water from his flanks. He turned back to check on his offspring. He saw the ripple in the water first, a smooth V-shaped wake cutting against the flow. He saw the crocodile's snout break the surface, aiming for the straggler. Instinct demanded he plunge back in. He should have used his horns to thrash the water, to create a diversion, to do anything. But fear, cold and sharp, had seized his muscles. He had frozen. Just for a second. but a second is a lifetime in the wild. The jaws snapped shut. The calf went under. The water turned red. And Jabari had stood on the bank, whole and healthy, and entirely hollow. The herd had moved on. They didn't mourn the way humans did, but the loss changed his status. A bull who couldn't protect his own blood was viewed with suspicion. Jabari had become aggressive to compensate, picking fights he couldn't win, challenging the lead bull, until eventually he drifted away, a rogue by choice, punishing himself with solitude. A stumble behind him brought him back to the present. Amara had tripped over a root and lay panting in the dust, too weak to rise. Jabari stopped. He looked back. The lion cub was a skeleton in a fur coat. Her ribs rose and fell in rapid, shallow spasms. If she didn't drink soon, she wouldn't last the afternoon. He looked around. They were in a dry wash, a place where water had once flowed before the drought and the fire. Jabari walked to the lowest point of the curve, where the sand was slightly darker. He dropped to his knees, an awkward, heavy movement for a buffalo, and began to dig. He used his hooves, scraping away the hot top layer of sand. He dug with a frantic energy, throwing dirt behind him. Amara watched, confused, her head resting on her paws. He dug until the sand turned cool and clumpy. He pushed deeper, his muzzle acting as a shovel, until a small pool of seep water began to fill the bottom of the hole. It was muddy, brown, and meager, but it was water. He stood up, backed away, and snorted at Amara. She didn't need to be told twice. She dragged herself to the hole and drank. She drank until her belly was distended and tight. When she finished, she looked up at him, mud dripping from her whiskers. For the first time, her eyes held more than fear. They held a dawning recognition. "You did this for me." Jabari looked away, uncomfortable with the gratitude. He wasn't a hero. He was just paying a debt to a ghost. As the days blurred into 3, a strange routine emerged. They were an impossible pair, the tank and the kitten. When Amara found a large dung beetle rolling a ball across their path, she dropped into a crouch, butt wiggling, and pounced. She missed, landing face first in the dirt. Jabari, who had stopped to graze on a patch of surviving tough grass, let out a sound, a huffing exhale through his nose. It was a laugh. It had to be. Amara sat up, shaking the dust off her ears, and looked at him indignantly. Then, seemingly deciding that dignity was overrated, she ran over and rubbed her cheek against his leg. This time, Jabari didn't flinch. He leaned into the touch, just a fraction. But the peace was shattered on the 4th day. They crested a ridge and looked down into a valley that had escaped the worst of the fire. The wind blowing up from the basin was sweet with the scent of grass, and there, grazing in the golden light, was a herd. His herd. Hundreds of Cape buffalo grazed, their tails flicking, the calves playing in the safety of the group. Jabari froze. The pull was magnetic. This was safety. This was his kind. If he went down there, the hyenas wouldn't dare follow. He started down the slope, Amara trotting determinedly in his shadow, suppressing the sting in her paws for the safety of his presence. But as they approached, the wind shifted. It carried the scent of the lion cub to the herd. The reaction was instant. Heads snapped up. The grazing stopped. The silence that fell over the herd was absolute. The matriarch of the herd, an old cow with one horn broken at the tip, stepped forward. She bellowed a warning, a deep, resonant sound that shook the leaves on the trees. The herd formed a phalanx, a solid wall of horns facing Jabari. They weren't welcoming him. They were threatening him. They smelled the predator. They saw the abomination. A young bull eager to prove himself broke the line. He was massive in his prime, his muscles bunching under glossy skin. He charged toward them, eyes locked on Amara. "Run!" Jabari's body language screamed, but Amara was paralyzed by the thunder of the approaching beast. She pressed herself against Jabari's leg, trembling. Jabari had a choice. Step aside and let nature take its course. Let the herd trample the lion, and perhaps be accepted back into the fold. or defend the enemy and become an outcast forever. Jabari didn't hesitate. He stepped in front of Amara, lowering his boss to meet the charge. Crack! The sound of horn on horn was sickeningly loud, like a gunshot echoing through the valley. The impact sent a shockwave of dust into the air. The young bull was strong, fresh, and angry. He pushed hard, his hooves digging furrows in the earth. But Jabari was a veteran of 100 wars. He didn't just block. He twisted his neck, using the leverage of his massive shoulders to throw the younger bull off balance. He grunted with effort, pain flaring in his old joints. With a violent heave, he drove the young bull back, goring the air, bellowing a challenge to the entire herd. "She is with me!" The herd stared. The matriarch snorted, shaking her head. She turned away, presenting her flank, a sign of dismissal. The herd followed her. They would not fight Jabari, but they would not accept him. He was tainted. He was a traitor to the blood. Jabari stood panting, watching his people walk away, leaving him alone in the dust. He was bleeding from a fresh gash on his shoulder where the young bull's horn had glanced off. Amara crept out from behind him. She sensed the magnitude of what had just happened. She reached up, licking the blood on his shoulder. Jabari looked down at her. He had lost everything now. Everything but her. "Come," his nudge seemed to say. "We have to keep moving." They were nearing the Green Valley, the land of the lions, but the path led through the Narrows, a jagged canyon of red rock. It was a bottleneck, a trap. As the sun began to set, painting the canyon walls in blood-red light, the laughter started. It echoed from the rocks above. It bounced off the canyon floor. Kessie. She wasn't behind them anymore. She was ahead of them. She had flanked them while they dealt with the herd. And she had brought reinforcements. The canyon floor ahead rippled with shadows. 20 pairs of eyes glowed in the gloom. Jabari stopped. He looked at the steep walls. Unclimbable. He looked back, too far to run. He looked ahead. Death. He spotted a shallow alcove in the canyon wall, a small cave barely deep enough for two. He nudged Amara toward it. "Get in," he pushed her with his snout. "Stay behind me." Amara huddled in the back of the cave, pressing herself into the cool stone. She watched as Jabari turned around to face the opening. He planted his hooves. He lowered his head. He blocked the entire entrance with his body. The laughter stopped. The silence that followed was worse. Then, the first shadow leaped. The battle was not a skirmish. It was a siege. The hyenas came in waves, like a rising tide of teeth and claws. Kessie had abandoned caution. She sensed the buffalo's fatigue, the stiffness in his old joints. She directed the attack from the back, her voice a series of sharp yips and growls. "Attack the legs! Hamstring him! Make him fall!" Jabari fought with the fury of a creature who knows he is dying. He hooked a hyena that got too close, tossing it against the canyon wall with a bone-breaking crunch. He stomped, crushing ribs under his hooves. He swung his horns like scythes, keeping the horde at bay. But for every hyena he threw back, 2 more took its place. They were fast, darting in to snap at his hocks, tearing strips of flesh from his flanks. Amara watched from the darkness, her eyes wide with horror. She smelled the iron tang of blood, Jabari's blood. She saw his breath coming in ragged, wet gasps. He was a fortress, but even fortresses crumble under enough weight. The moon rose, casting long, twisted shadows into the canyon. Dogo, emboldened by the numbers, saw an opening. Jabari lunged left to fend off an attacker, leaving a gap on the right. Dogo darted through, slipping past the bull's defense, straight into the cave. He was fast, his jaws snapping inches from Amara's face. Jabari roared, a sound of pure panic, trying to turn to protect her. But Kessie had been waiting for this moment. As the bull twisted, she lunged at his hind leg, her jaws clamped down on the tendon. With a vicious shake of her head, she tore it. The great bull crashed to his knees, bellowing in agony. He thrashed, trying to reach the intruder, but his leg was useless. He couldn't turn fast enough. Amara was cornered against the stone. Dogo grinned, saliva dripping from his jowls. He loomed over her, ready to snap her neck. Something snapped inside the cub. She looked at Jabari. The mighty giant brought low for her. She looked at the blood pooling around his knees. The fear that had defined her existence since the fire evaporated, replaced by a white-hot rage. She was not just a victim. She was not just a snack for a scavenger. She was Amara, daughter of Melek, daughter of kings. She didn't cower, she stepped forward. She planted her small paws in the dust, opened her mouth, and unleashed everything she had. It wasn't a squeak. It wasn't a cry for help. It started deep in her chest, a rumble that resonated against the cave walls. It grew, cracking her voice, forcing its way out. A roar. It was rough and unbroken, but it carried the deep, resonant frequency of the apex predator. I am here. The sound echoed up the canyon walls, magnified by the acoustics of the stone. Dogo flinched, startled by the ferocity of the small thing. Silence hung for a heartbeat. Even the hyenas outside paused. Then, the answer came. It rolled down from the canyon rim like thunder, a sound so deep it vibrated in the marrow of every living thing in the gorge. It was a roar that claimed the earth, the sky, and the night. Casey spun around, looking up. On the ridge, silhouetted against the moon, stood a monster. A male lion with a mane like a black storm cloud. Moloch. He didn't climb down, he flowed down the treacherous rocks like liquid gold. And he wasn't alone. Zuri and 3 other lionesses descended with him, a hunting party of lethal grace. Panic broke the hyena clan. The order turned to chaos. "Lion! Lion!" the yips screamed. Malik hit the canyon floor with earth-shaking force. He didn't pause. He swatted a hyena aside like a nuisance fly, his eyes locked on the cave. Zuri was a blur of speed, overtaking the fleeing Casey. The matriarch shrieked as Zuri's claws caught her flank, sending her tumbling into the darkness, defeated and broken. Dogo, realizing his mistake, tried to scramble out of the cave past the fallen buffalo. He ran straight into Malik. The king didn't even slow down. One swipe of a paw the size of a dinner plate, and Dogo was motionless. Within minutes, the canyon was clear. The surviving hyenas had vanished into the night, their laughter silenced forever. The dust settled. The adrenaline began to fade, leaving a heavy tension in the air. Moloch stood panting, his chest heaving. He smelled the blood. He smelled the enemy. He turned his massive head toward the cave. There, crumpled on his knees, was Jabari. The buffalo was breathing hard, head low, blood matting his legs. He watched the lion approach. He knew this moment. He had fought off the scavengers only to be delivered to the executioner. It was the way of things. He was too weak to stand, too weak to fight. He lowered his head, exposing his neck, accepting his end with dignity. Moloch stepped forward, his lips peeling back to reveal ivory fangs. He was a killer, and this was prey. A buffalo this size would feed the pride for a week. "No!" A small, tawny blur shot out of the cave. Mara threw herself between the king and the bull. Moloch stopped, surprised. He looked down at his daughter. She was filthy, covered in ash and mud, but she was alive. Mara didn't back down. She stood over Jabari's snout, her small body shielding the massive head. She looked at her father and chuffed, a sound of greeting, of family. Then she turned and licked the buffalo's bloody nose. She rubbed her head against his boss, purring loudly, frantically. "He is mine! He is safe!" Zuri approached slowly. She sniffed the air. She smelled the buffalo, yes, but layered over it was the scent of her cub. She saw the defensive wounds on the bull's flanks, wounds taken facing away from the cave. She saw the dead hyenas. The lions understood. The language of survival is universal. This beast had bled for their blood. Malik's eyes softened, the aggression drained from his posture. He looked at the battered buffalo, then at his daughter, alive and fierce because of this enemy. Slowly, deliberately, the Lion King stepped forward. Jabari flinched, closing his eyes, waiting for the teeth. But there was no bite. Malik lowered his massive head until it was level with Jabari's. He pressed his forehead against the buffalo's boss, a gentle, firm bump. It was a gesture never seen in the wild, a breaking of every biological law. It was a bow of respect, a king acknowledging a warrior. Malik stepped back. He let out a soft grunt to the pride. "We leave him." Zuri rushed to Amara, grooming her aggressively, checking every inch of her. Amara tolerated it for a moment, then pulled away to nuzzle Jabari one last time. "Goodbye," the touch said. The pride waited at the end of the canyon. They did not hunt that night. 5 years is a lifetime in the savannah. The rains had returned, washing away the scars of the red beast. The ashlands were green again, lush with tall grass and sweet sage. The circle of life continued, brutal and beautiful. At the edge of the great watering hole, the pride of the valley lay resting. Amara was no longer a cub. She was a huntress, powerful and sleek, her muscles rippling under a coat of gold. She sat tall, watching the horizon, her amber eyes sharp and intelligent. A herd of buffalo approached the water. The younger lions in the pride tensed, their tails twitching. Buffalo were dangerous, but they were also a feast. A young male lion, barely out of adolescence, began to creep forward into the stalking grass, his belly low to the ground. Amara stood up. She let out a low, menacing growl, directed not at the prey but at her brother. "Stop." The young male looked at her, confused. Why pass up a meal? But he obeyed. Amara was the lead huntress. Her word was law. Amara walked to the water's edge, alone. From the herd, a bull separated himself. He was ancient. His horns were worn down, his coat gray and patchy, and he walked with a stiff limp in his hind legs, a permanent reminder of a night in a canyon long ago. He was slower than the others, kept alive only by his sheer size and the respect of the herd. Jabari. He moved to the water, opposite Amara. He lowered his head to drink, then paused. He looked up. Amber eyes met dark, wet ones. The birds sang. The wind rustled the acacia leaves. For a long moment, predator and prey simply existed in the same space, bound by a secret history that the rest of the wild would never understand. There was no fear. There was no aggression. Only memory. Jabari dipped his head in a slight nod. Amara chuffed softly, a sound that carried across the water. The old bull drank his fill, turned, and slowly limped back to his herd. Amara watched him go until he disappeared into the dust of the setting sun, a guardian who had once carried a lion's heart through the fire. She turned back to her pride. Tonight, they would hunt elsewhere. If this powerful story moved you, subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss another epic tale of courage, adventure, and the extraordinary world of lions. Share this video with a friend who would love this story.